Did I scare you? I didn't? Oh, shucks. Well, it was worth the shot at least. But since I brought up booze earlier, have you heard of Super Mario Kart for the Super Nintendo? I know, great transition. And like most things, Super Mario Kart has aged like fine wine, which is why when SNES Mario Circuit 3 got added to the Booster Course Pass, no one got upset and instead brought their hands together and cheered with thunderous applause. And it's totally not because that's the 17th time when we've seen that track already. But I'm not here to argue whether or not Super Mario Kart tracks or courses are fan favorites or whether or not they deserve to come in the next Mario Kart game. What I'm here to do is give a clear and descriptive idea as to what each of the courses entail, meaning I'm here to describe what each of the courses are in semi-broad categories. The reason why I'm doing this is because I've noticed a trend when predicting courses for the new Booster Course Pass that usually some tracks are excluded because they feel too similar to other tracks that we either already have in the base game or pre-existing tour tracks. For example, tracks like Calamari Desert and Sunset Wilds. Both are desert tracks, and they also fit the subcategory of a desert plateau track. See where I'm getting at? Other times, however, they only state that because of similarities between the name, as is the case with Dry Dry Desert and Dry Dry Ruins. Although the Mario Kart 8 version is a Desert Oasis, while Dry Dry Ruins is a desert ruin kind of track. Same could also be said with Koopa Cape and Piranha Plant Slide, but I believe I'll get to it when I get to it. For now, let's start off with our main selection from Super Mario Kart. But before we do, make sure to like, share and subscribe, as that would potentially help me in the algorithm and help spread my ideas to more further people, as the whole point of this video is to encourage discussion and talks within the Mario Kart community. But with that being said, let's get to the tracks. Yes, we start off this video with Mario Circuit. It's only fitting to start off with the track that started the franchise after all, and besides, this is the one that most people recognize the most. So to start off with describing this track, you start off in a large grassy plain area, with the background having large hills and what seems to be a sunset motif, or a sunrise, I don't judge. However, the track is surrounded by dirt or sand, with walls of covered bricks that show us the grassy plains that I mentioned earlier. This track is very basic, and would fit into the obvious circuit category of racetracks from Super Mario Kart. However, if I had to add any other descriptors, I'd say it would be a grassy plains sort of circuit. The reason why I have to make that distinction is because for later tracks down the road, there can be considered circuit tracks, however, there are certain things that differentiate each circuit track from each other. So although Mario Circuit would fall under the same umbrella as, say, Royal Raceway, Mario Raceway, or Daisy Circuit, there are differences between all of them that make them unique in the subcategory area of this list. Now, with Mario Circuit out of the way, let's move on to our next track. You know, I thought trying to describe Choco Island would be a lot easier than I thought. But when I actually sat down to try and think the characteristics of Choco Island, I was stumped. Just a teeny bit. Because we can't really tell if we are driving just on a giant area of mud and dirt or we're actually driving on a huge land of shit. That being said, however, we'd like to have a track called Choco Mountain, where essentially it helps answer some of the questions as to what the hell Choco Island really is. So what is Choco Island exactly? Well, from everything I was able to narrow down, essentially, it has muddy areas. In the background, there's mountainous giant rocks, and for the most part, it's plain. There's no hills or anything other than the mountains that are in the background, and some form of plant life that occupies the track. And depending on what version of Choco Island it is, there are giant or small mud pits scattered across the land. So it's fair to say that it's a muddy plain spot with a mountainous background and giant mud pits. If anything, a better descriptor would say Choco Island is just a desert with dirt and mud. However, since that's out of the way, let's move on to our next cause, which I'm sure won't be complicated to narrow down the characteristics and easily put in a category, right? Right? What in the actual... Alright, now that that's out of the way, I do apologize for the slight outburst. But on a serious note, what on God's green earth is Ghost Valley? Like, genuinely, what is it? Literally all it is a boardwalk with a literal empty pit with nothing in it. It's pure black everywhere you look, other than the blue skybox that it has, with slight black silhouettes showing up in the back. Oh, and the occasional blue, of course. How can I forget about that? Literally, if you were only able to play Ghost on the SNES, you would be given no impression that it takes place on a lake. Sure, there's trees, so you can make the assumption that it takes place in a forest, but with the empty void that is the ground, there is no discernible way for anyone to guess where the hell you are. But Cereza, I hear someone saying, it takes place on a boardwalk, so of course there has to be water underneath it. Yeah, okay, sure, do you see any water? 'Cause I sure as hell don't. Not even the GBA version of Boo Lake or frickin' SNES Ghost Valley, for example. It's still a frickin' pit, but at least you can see your surroundings. It's not until Mario Kart Wii, or better example, Mario Kart Tour, where you can actually figure out where the hell you are. But, since I have to go on based on the SNES version, and not the Mario Kart Tour version, as I established in my rules earlier, it's... the description here is that it's a boardwalk, it's dark, it has a bottomless pit, and it has mountains, from what I can tell, and you're located in a forest. So the essential summary of what we have is it's a ghost-themed boardwalk with mountains in the background and a giant dark pit, with the occasional forestry. That is literally the best I can do with what SNES offers. Please, for the love of God, be there any track that isn't as complicated to figure out than this. Oh, thank the heavens! My guardian paratrooper was there listening to my pleas after all. Anywho, now we move on to my favorite course from Super Mario Kart. Koopa Beach 1 and 2. Reason why I'm not lumping these two together is because they're quite different category-wise. Now, granted, they both fit the beach category to a T, many would argue. However, there are subtle differences in map layout and design that make these two more different than alike. As you can probably tell from the footage that you're seeing now, we are showing Koopa Beach 1. Notice how the layout is separated by small little islands that are divided by small streaks of water. Now, you may be wondering, why am I mentioning this? Koopa Beach 2 basically almost has the same thing. Incorrect. You see, Koopa Beach 1 although a beach course along with Koopa Beach 2 fits an archipelago subcategory, meaning it's basically a series of islands that are all connected to each other via shallow water. Meanwhile, you have Koopa Beach 2, which essentially is just one big island. The best way I can put this is like to compare Shy Guy Beach with Koopa Troopa Beach from the N64. Starting to understand my logic and reasoning as to why I had to separate these two. So as I stated before, both tracks are beach tracks. There is no debating that. However, the main difference is what kind of beach track it is. So Koopa Beach 1 is a beach archipelago, while Koopa Beach 2 is a beach island. It's important to see the details, as soon it'll come into play later. But since we have the beeped up, let's try and dry off with another course. You know, when I said let's go somewhere else to dry off, this isn't the place that I had in mind. Ah, Vanilla Lake. It sucks. Not a single soul likes playing on this course. Mostly because of the ice cubes and the fact it's weirdly shaped, but other than that it does suck. And yet, I don't mind this course. Granted, I can understand why everyone hates it so much, but come on, the music, it's pretty good. But besides, we're not here to talk about whether or not everyone hates Vanilla Lake or not. We're here to talk about the characteristics of what makes Vanilla Lake, Vanilla Lake. Depending on what circle or frozen hell you're playing on, you're either going to get a giant lake within the middle of the map, or you're just going to get a bunch of white with some puddles in between. Other than that, there's not much of a difference. Both tracks are tundras, they both have lakes or ponds. Either way, they both have water, considering you're driving on ice. And I don't know if you know this, but ice is a solid form of water. And for the most part, there really isn't much. Sure, there's like those white hills from Super Mario World, but that's about it. It's basically just as plain as the other ones. So if I were to describe this course in any way, it's a plain tundra course that has that occasional waterhole. Oh, and how can I forget what makes Vanilla Lake Vanilla Lake? Stupid ass ice cubes that exist just for the sake of annoying you and destroying whatever patience you had left. But hey, at least the tour remix of Vanilla Lake is actually pretty good. At least we have something to look forward to that has the name Vanilla Lake on it. Now, let's try and go to a place where I can actually dry off instead of freezing my ass in the middle of the damn tundra. My, we are just getting all the extremes today, aren't we? SNES Bowser Castle. The first ever Bowser Castle, and the only Bowser Castle to never get a remake outside of the GBA port. Now, isn't that just strange? Other than the obvious fact that Nintendo has forgotten about SNES Bowser Castle the same way that Atlus has forgotten about Persona 1, 2, and 2, we are now here to describe what makes this Bowser Castle so itself. Other than the obvious differences that each of the SNES Bowser Castle has, I'm looking at you fucking Bowser Castle 2, each castle has a different layout and has different properties within it. However, what all of them do have in common though, is that they all take place in a freaking castle, as you can probably tell from the background, and it's quite lovely pillar architecture. It also takes place in a giant pool bath of lava. Now, if only a certain track that I talked about already had a certain characteristic added to it that would make it more obvious as to where you are. Huh. Yeah, I can't imagine what that track would be. But yeah, even for being the first Bowser Castle, it basically has all the mainstays of what a Bowser Castle should be. It's got a castle, it's got lava, and it's got stone. Point blank and simple. Now, could anyone do me a favor and get me the hell out of here? Alright, finally! A track that isn't absurdly cold or absurdly hot. Now we're getting somewhere. Now, for those who are unaware of the Mario lore, Donut Plains is basically based on the Super Mario World location named after the same thing, Donut Plains, which is the starting area of the game. And surprisingly, in my opinion, Donut Plains is one of the more vibrant courses in this game, considering its bland and not so epic and chaotic nature. But moving on from the personal opinions of a course, let's start describing what Donut Plains is exactly. To start off, it's grassy, and it's called Plains. I get it, Donut Plain. Anyway, like I said before, it's a grassy plains sort of track, so there really isn't much to look at other than the hills in the background. Depending on what Donut Plains you are, there's always going to be at least one lake or one pond. The best way to describe Donut Plains in a sentence is the following. Donut Plains is a grassy plains track with differently placed ponds and occasional wooden bridges, as you can see in tracks like Donut Plains 3. So yeah, that pretty much covers it. There really isn't much to go on about, other than its neat little reference to Super Mario World. But, since we finished off with this one, now we shall move on to the final track that we have yet to cover. You know, I wasn't really expecting this, but considering the situations that I was able to wrap myself in, I probably should have. Rainbow Road. One of the best and most anticipated tracks in each single installment of Mario Kart, ever since this game. And I understand why. This Rainbow Road, although being the first and by far the plainest, it is by no means the worst Rainbow Road out there. In fact, I'd argue it's one of the best. But don't worry, potentially I can make a ranking video on all the Rainbow Roads someday. That being said, however, although it is a spectacle to look at, there really isn't much to describe here, as it's pretty simplistic. What you have is a rainbow in space. That's essentially all you have. There's not really much to really delve in, considering that you're in space, and unlike the excuse that Ghost Valley has, which it doesn't, by the way, Rainbow Road has the excuse of having a bottomless void because you're in space. Hence, it adds to the feeling of isolation that you feel. But I'm not here to interpret meanings or anything, I'm just here to describe what the course is. So, to basically sum it all up, Rainbow Road is a space course with a road made of rainbows, habited by occasional thwomps. Ah yes, those thwomps. I'm sure those little buggers made someone throw their friggin' SNES controller at one point. But yeah, those are all the SNES tracks that I had to go over. I think I did a reasonable job trying to describe the courses to all of you, at least in the best manner that I could. But since that's all I got to say on that, I really do hope you enjoyed all the content that I was able to share with you today. My main job here was not only to inform, but to also entertain, and if I was able to do both of those things, that makes me all the merrier. So, remember, leave a like, share and subscribe, and I will potentially see you all later. This